Act 1. The Eagle and the Eaglet. In the Roaring Twenties, America was a nation in love with heroes. And there was no greater hero, no figure more universally beloved than Charles Augustus Lindbergh. In 1927, Lucky Lindy, a shy, lanky male pilot from the Midwest, had done the impossible. He had flown solo nonstop across the vast and treacherous Atlantic Ocean, from New York to Paris. His 33-hour flight in his tiny single-engine plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, was not just an aviation milestone. It was a global phenomenon. He was greeted in Paris by a crowd of over 100,000 people. He returned to America to a ticker-tape parade that was witnessed by millions. He was a lone eagle, a symbol of American courage, individualism, and the limitless potential of the machine age. His fame was absolute. He married the brilliant and beautiful and Morrow, the daughter of a U.S. ambassador, who herself would become an accomplished aviator and celebrated author. They were the ultimate celebrity couple, America's royal family. Their every move chronicled by a worshipful press. To escape the relentless glare of the public eye, they sought to build a sanctuary for themselves. They built a large, isolated country state in the rural Sourland Mountains of Hopewell, New Jersey. It was a fortress of solitude, a place where they hoped to raise their family in peace, far from the madding crowd. In 1930, their joy was completed with the birth of their first child. Charles Augustus Lindbergh, Jr., the press nicknamed him the Eaglet. He was a beautiful child, with his mother's blonde curls and his father's blue eyes. He was the heir to an American legend, a child born into a world of immense privilege and fame. For the first 20 months of his life, the Lindberghs' Hopewell estate was the idyllic sanctuary they had dreamed of. But on the cold, windy night of March 1st, 1932, that sanctuary would be brutally violated, and the Lindberghs' perfect life would be shattered forever, plunging them and the entire nation into crime that would become known as the crime of the century. It was a Tuesday night. Charles Lindbergh, his wife, and their 20-month-old son were at their Hopewell home, a rare occurrence as they usually spent weekdays at his family estate closer to New York. The baby, Charles Jr., was suffering from a cold, so the family had decided to stay in the country. The child's nursery was on the second floor in a corner room. At around 7:30 p.m., the baby's nurse, Betty Gow, put him to bed, securing him with safety pins to his blankets to prevent him from climbing out of the crib. The evening progressed as usual. The Lindberghs had dinner. At around 9 p.m., Charles Lindbergh heard a strange sound, like the cracking of wood, which he assumed came from the kitchen. It was a sound that, in retrospect, would become a haunting clue. At 10 p.m., Betty Gow went to check on the baby before going to bed. She walked into the nursery and was greeted by a chilling sight. The crib was empty. Her first thought was that Lindbergh himself had taken the baby as a practical joke. He was known for his sometimes unsettling pranks. She went and asked Anne, who was just coming out of her bath, and knew nothing. A cold wave of panic began to wash over the house. Betty Gow then went to Charles Lindbergh's study and asked him if he had the baby. He did not. In that moment, they knew something was terribly wrong. Lindbergh ran upstairs to the nursery. He saw the empty crib. He noticed that the window near the crib, which was usually kept shut and latched, was now open. A cold wind was blowing into the room. On the windowsill, he found a plain white envelope. This was no prank. This was a kidnapping. Lindbergh grabbed his rifle and ran outside, searching the dark grounds around the house, his heart pounding with a mixture of rage and terror. He found crude footprints in the mud beneath the nursery window. A short distance away, he discovered another, more damning piece of evidence. A crudely made 3-section wooden ladder of a type no one had ever seen before. It was broken between the second and third sections. The cracking sound he had heard earlier had not come from the kitchen. It was the sound of the kidnapper's ladder, breaking as it descended with the child. The realization must have been sickening. The kidnapper had been clumsy. He may have dropped the baby. The search of the house and the grounds continued frantically, but there was no sign of Charles Lindbergh Jr. The eaglet had vanished. Act 2, the ransom note and the circus. With the horrifying discovery of the empty crib and the broken ladder, the Lindbergh home transformed from a sanctuary into the epicenter of a national crisis. The local Hopewell police were the first to arrive, but they were quickly overwhelmed by the scale of the crime and the fame of the victim's family. They were followed by the New Jersey State Police. The crime scene, however, was already compromised. In the initial frantic search, Lindbergh, the staff, and the first officers had moved through the house and grounds, inadvertently destroying or contaminating any potential footprints, fingerprints, or other trace evidence the kidnapper might have left behind. The nursery, the most critical part of the crime scene, was not sealed off for hours. It was a catastrophic start to a desperate investigation. The only concrete piece of evidence they had was a ransom note left on the nursery windowsill. It was a document that would be analyzed, debated, and dissected for years to come. It was poorly written, filled with grammatical errors and strange German-like phrasing, suggesting the author was a non-native English speaker. The note was short, but chillingly direct. It demanded a ransom of $50,000. It warned Lindbergh not to contact the police or the press, and it contained a bizarre, interlocking symbol at the bottom, 2 blue circles, a red circle in the middle, and 3 holes, a sort of cryptic signature. The news of the kidnapping could not be contained. By the next morning, it was the biggest story in the world. A media circus descended upon Hopewell. Hundreds of reporters, photographers, and newsreel cameramen set up a virtual camp outside the gates of the Lindbergh estate. Their cameras pointed at the house like cannons. The story of the lone eagle's stolen eaglet was a newspaper editor's dream. The coverage was relentless, sensational, and often wildly inaccurate. The public was captivated and horrified. Offers of help poured in from every corner of the country. Even the notorious gangster Al Capone, from his prison cell in Chicago, offered his services to help find the baby in exchange for his freedom, an offer that was quickly rejected. Charles Lindbergh, a man who fiercely guarded his privacy, was now at the center of a storm. He decided to take control of the investigation himself, often sidelining the official police efforts. He believed he could negotiate with the kidnappers directly. This decision would lead him down a strange and frustrating path, into the murky world of con artists and well-intentioned but misguided intermediaries. The most significant of these intermediaries was a retired, eccentric school principal from the Bronx named Dr. John E. Condon. Condon, who was known by the nickname Jafsy, placed an ad in a local newspaper, offering to act as a go-between, and add $1,000 of his own money to the ransom. To everyone's surprise, the kidnappers responded. This began a bizarre and prolonged series of negotiations, conducted through coded messages in the classified ads of newspapers. Jafsy became a public figure, a self-appointed negotiator in the crime of the century. Through this strange correspondence, a meeting was arranged. On a dark night in a Bronx cemetery, Jafsy met with a man he believed was one of the kidnappers. The man, who spoke with thick German accent and called himself John, remained in the shadows. He could not provide proof that the baby was still alive, but he promised to send the child's sleeping suit as evidence. A few days later, a package arrived at Dr. Condon's home. Inside was a small sleeping suit. It was identified by Charles Lindbergh as the one his son had been wearing on the night he was taken. The proof, however grim, was now in their hands. The kidnappers were real, and they still had the child. The stage was set for the ransom payment, a desperate gamble to bring the eaglet home. Act 3, the payment and the terrible truth. On the evening of April 2nd, 1932, over a month after the kidnapping, the final, desperate act of the ransom negotiation took place. Following a series of complex instructions, Dr. Condon, Jaffe, once again met with a mysterious man named John at a different cemetery in the Bronx. This time, Charles Lindbergh himself was waiting nearby in a car, listening, though he never got a clear look at the man's face. In the darkness, Jaffe handed over the $50,000 ransom money. The money was a mix of regular bills and gold certificates, and the FBI had meticulously recorded the serial number of every single bill. In exchange, John gave Condon a note. It contained instructions on where to find the baby. The note claimed that the child was safe on a boat named Nellie, located near Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. A surge of hope electrified the investigation. Lindbergh himself led a frantic and extensive aerial search of the coastline, his spirit of St. Louis, swooping low over the waves, looking for any sign of the boat Nellie. But the search was fruitless. There was no boat. There was no Nellie. The note was a cruel, heartless lie. The kidnappers had their money, but the Lindberghs did not have their son. The hope that had sustained them for weeks began to crumble into a sickening dread. For the next 5 weeks, the country held its breath. The Lindberghs waited, their agony unimaginable. The FBI, now with a list of the ransom money serial numbers, began the slow, painstaking process of tracking the bills, hoping they would lead them to the kidnappers. The trail was cold. The mystery was absolute. Then, on May 12, 1932, the agonizing wait came to a brutal and tragic end. A truck driver named William Allen pulled over to the side of a road just a few miles from the Lindbergh estate in Hopewell. He walked into the woods to relieve himself. There, in a shallow, hastily dug grave, he made a horrific discovery: the badly decomposed body of a toddler. The authorities were called immediately. Although the body was in a terrible state, the evidence was undeniable. The clothing was identified as the same that Charles Jr. had been wearing. An examination of the remains confirmed it was the missing Lindbergh baby. The autopsy revealed the cause of death: a massive fracture to the skull. The crime of the century had just become its most tragic murder case. The discovery of the body shifted the entire focus of the investigation. This was no longer a kidnapping. It was a murder inquiry. The theory that the baby had been dropped and killed accidentally during the abduction, when the ladder broke, now seemed horrifically plausible. The kidnappers had likely known the child was dead all along, and the entire ransom negotiation had been a cynical, cruel charade to extort money from a desperate family. The investigation now had a new, powerful weapon: the ransom money. The Treasury Department distributed a list of the serial numbers of the hot bills to every bank, store, and gas station in the region. The hunt was no longer for a ghost. It was for a man who was almost certainly spending marked money. For 2 long years, the search continued. A few of the gold certificates began to surface in and around New York City, each one a tiny breadcrumb on a cold trail. The FBI painstakingly tracked each bill, slowly but surely tightening a net around a specific area of the Bronx. They knew their man was there, somewhere. They just had to wait for him to make a mistake. Act 4. The Trial of the Century. For 2.5 years, the trail of the ransom money remained frustratingly cold. The FBI and police forces from New York and New Jersey had painstakingly tracked every reported sighting of the marked bills, but the main culprit remained a ghost. Then, on September 15, 1934, a gas station attendant in the Bronx received a $10 gold certificate as payment. The customer was acting suspiciously. Following protocol, the attendant jotted down the car's license plate number on the bill. Later, when the bill was deposited at the bank, it was flagged. The serial number was a match to the Lindbergh ransom money. The license plate was traced to a blue Dodge sedan belonging to a German immigrant carpenter who lived in the Bronx. His name was Bruno Richard Hauptmann. On September 19th, police located and arrested Hauptmann. He initially denied any involvement, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. In his garage, they found over $14,000 of the ransom money hidden away. A search of his home revealed more damning clues. The wood used to construct the crude ladder found at the crime scene was a perfect match to the wood from the floorboards in Hauptmann's attic. A section of the attic floor was even missing. The tools found in his garage were shown to have made the specific markings found on the ladder, and handwriting experts would later testify that Hauptmann's handwriting was a match to the writing on the 15 ransom notes. The case against Bruno Richard Hauptmann seemed open and shut. He was indicted for extortion and murder. The trial began in January 1935 in Flemington, New Jersey. It was not just a trial. It was a global media event dubbed by the press as a trial of the century. The small town of Flemington was overrun with reporters, celebrities, and curious onlookers. The trial was a spectacle of chaos and sensationalism. The prosecution, led by New Jersey Attorney General David T. Willents, presented a powerful, if circumstantial, case. They laid out the evidence of the ransom money, the ladder, and the handwriting. Dr. Condon Jaffe identified Hauptmann as the mysterious John he had met with in the cemeteries, though his testimony was sometimes inconsistent. Charles Lindbergh himself took the stand, testifying that he recognized Hauptmann's voice as the one he had heard calling out during the ransom drop. Hauptmann's defense was weak. He claimed that the money and other items had been left with him for safekeeping by a friend and business partner, a man named Isidor Fish, who had since returned to Germany and died. He claimed he was an innocent man, a victim of circumstance, but he was a poor witness, often appearing arrogant and angry on the stand. The jury did not believe him. After 5 weeks of testimony and 11 hours of deliberation, on February 13, 1935, the jury delivered its verdict. Bruno Richard Hauptmann was guilty of murder in the first degree. The sentence was death. Act 5, Lingering Doubts and a Legacy of Fear. Despite the guilty verdict, the case of Bruno Richard Hauptmann was far from closed in the court of public opinion. For many, the evidence was too circumstantial, the investigation too flawed, and the media pressure too intense to be certain that justice had truly been served. Hauptmann, for his part, maintained his innocence to the very end. He turned down a last-minute deal to have his sentence commuted to life in prison in exchange for a full confession. He was offered a large sum of money by a newspaper for his story, but he refused. He went to the electric chair on April 3, 1936, proclaiming his innocence with his final words. In the decades that followed, a number of troubling questions and alternative theories have kept the mystery alive. Was Hauptmann truly the lone kidnapper, or was he part of a larger conspiracy? Some investigators at the time believed he did not act alone. His story about the money coming from his friend Isidor Fish, while convenient, was never entirely disproven. Was he a willing participant, or just a small cog in a larger machine, a scapegoat who took the fall for more powerful figures? Others have questioned the evidence itself. The eyewitness testimony, particularly from Dr. Condon, was often shaky. The police were accused of planting evidence and coercing witnesses. Some modern-day analysts have argued that the wood from the ladder was not a conclusive match to Hauptmann's attic, and that the handwriting analysis was subjective and unreliable. These lingering doubts have fueled a number of conspiracy theories. Some believe the kidnapping was an inside job orchestrated by someone close to the Lindbergh family, perhaps a disgruntled employee. Others have pointed the finger at organized crime, suggesting the kidnapping was a mob-related retaliation against Lindbergh. The most lasting legacy of the Lindbergh Baby Kidnapping was its profound impact on American law and society. The crime and the media circus that surrounded it led to the passage of the Federal Kidnapping Act in 1932, popularly known as the Lindbergh Law. This law made kidnapping a federal offense, giving the FBI jurisdiction to investigate such cases. The case effectively ended the era of gentlemen's agreements between the press and the police, ushering in a new, more aggressive, and often more sensational era of crime reporting. But its deepest impact was on the American psyche. The kidnapping of the son of America's greatest hero was a violation of the nation's sense of security. It proved that no one, no matter how famous or wealthy, was safe. It was a story that tapped into every parent's worst fear. The crime of the century was not just a legal case. It was a national trauma, a story of a lost child that symbolized a loss of innocence for an entire country. The ghost of the eaglet, Charles Lindbergh Jr., continues to haunt the American consciousness, a tragic symbol of mystery that, for many, was never truly solved.